Well, I want to welcome you to a wonderful evening with Wendy Redman. There are a couple of housekeeping things I'm always required to do. That's part of my contract here. One of them is to remind everybody about their cell phones, to silence them during the evening. And also I want to remind people that as great as I think this event is, there are other wonderful events being sponsored by summer sessions throughout the week, throughout the rest of the summer. For example, on Wednesday, we have Dermot Cole looking back at the Alaska's 150 years since the purchase from Russia. And tomorrow night, I'll be talking with Paul McCarthy, who's Professor Emeritus from the library down there, and really a very interesting discussion planned for that. Anyway, on Thursday nights, every night, for the summer, wonderful musical groups perform for you. So lots to check out, and you can go online at summer sessions and find out about those events. Well, let me introduce Wendy. I've known her ever since I arrived in Alaska. She was born and raised in Eastern Washington and attended Eastern Washington University and the University of Washington. She received her Master's of Public Policy degree from Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University in 1984. She first came to Alaska more than 45 years ago. During her nearly 40-year career at the university, in 1972, she was named the first administrative assistant, I believe. So we'll ask her about that prestigious appointment. But in 1975, her responsibilities increased. She was tapped to serve the Community College Division as Assistant Chancellor. Wendy began representing the community colleges before the Alaska State Legislature 3 years later in 1978. 2 years after that, the Board of Regents realized what an asset they had in her and asked her to represent the entire UA system before the lawmakers. She became Executive Vice President for the University Relations. She had responsibility for public affairs, state and federal relations, development, and corporate programs. In 1988, she was appointed to that post. And in 1998, she was interim UA president for several months between the departure of Dr. Jerome Commissar and General Mark Hamilton's first day on the job. Wendy is the recipient of several honors, including 2000, the Edith R. Bullock Prize for Excellence, and in 2010, she was recognized as a woman of distinction by the Girl Scouts. She helped form the Alaska Women's Commission and started UAF's Women's Center, and she has served in various roles. She helped in the transition teams of 3 different governors. So please welcome Wendy Redman. Thank you. So just a word, we have some lapel mics for the cameras, but if you have trouble hearing us, we can also employ some handheld for the auditorium. So let us know if you can't hear anything. Well, Wendy, you've retired to Lake Chelan. Isn't that where you grew up?
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit about your early years.
Well, growing up in Lake Chelan, which is just over the Cascade Mountains from Seattle, just about, we had like the perfect childhood because it was in the 50s and, things were easy and nice, and we had a 55-mile long lake, and so we all got to spend all summer in the lake, and there were 5 kids, and we were all feral like kids were in those days, where your mother would say goodbye in the morning, and then at night you'd come home for dinner. So it was pretty much a perfect childhood. And of course, when we got ready to retire, my husband grew up in the middle of New York City, so he wasn't used to this kind of an environment, and going back to this town where my brothers and sisters still live, and I went back to take care of my mother, and he was a little nervous, I think, about all that familiarity, but I think he's been good. He's liked it too. So I went home to take care of my mother, and she died a couple years ago at 93. And my brother, it used to be, is that on now?
Mm-hmm.
It used to be that I just had to say I was Greta's daughter, and I was golden for any kind of infraction if the police stopped me or anything. But now she's passed away, and of course we've all gotten older. So now in Chelan I say I'm Greg's sister, and my brother just finished his 44th year of teaching 7th grade biology. And so every person still in Chelan had biology from him, and they adored him. So now that's my ticket. I'm Greg's sister.
Okay, well now it sounds like education was an expectation for the kids when you were growing up.
Yeah,
Is that right?
I think for middle-class white families, that's kind of how it was for us. There was never a question. You were going to go to college. It was just where. It was an expectation.
Yeah. Well, and the 60s, though, when you grew up, was a pretty volatile age. Did it have any influence on you? I'm framing this as broadly as I can.
Well, I think I had probably the best possible experience of anybody I know. Growing up and getting to go to college from like 64 to 69 was like pretty much the nexus for political activists. It was a fabulous, fun time. In about 69, it started to not be so much fun anymore. Things started to get a little bit creepy, and people were dying, and there was the drugs that weren't fun anymore, and it wasn't fun, and the SDS had taken a bad turn, and so they were not fun anymore. But in the early years, it was so exciting and so energizing, and of course, there were so many things to protest. At that time, my God, women couldn't even enroll in the engineering program at the University of Washington. Not that I was a candidate to do that, but there was, there was so much discrimination, and with the war going on, and we'd come out of this very protected 50s childhood, and so we just sort of burst onto the scene, and the baby boomers were kind of right behind me, this massive army of kids who were just becoming politically aware. And so, looking back now, I've seen some documentaries about what it was like, and we seem sort of silly now politically, but it was extremely exciting and energizing. And then that whole anti-war movement really morphed into the women's movement, which carried on into the 70s, because of course the anti-war movement sort of highlighted for all of us females the sexism in the system. It was an extremely brutal experience to be a woman in the anti-war movement. You were really marginalized. So the women came out of that in the 70s, and really, we became very powerful. It was a very exciting time.
So did you cut your political teeth then during the
Yes.
60s, and that stood you in good stead, of course, when you became a representative and a lobbyist for the university down in Juneau. But let's get
No. No. It had nothing to do with any, the two were totally different.
Okay,
Yes,
so,
yeah. But we can get to that.
well, let's get you to Alaska next, okay? So you married, you had 2 children when you first arrived here in the 70s, right? Or 1970?
Yep, 1970, I did. First I came up to the university and visited a friend up here at IAB, and met Fred Dean. And Fred said, well, who are you? And I was an English major, and he's like, oh my God, I got this job. They had the biological papers. And he opened up a closet, and in the closet was just like mountains of biological papers, checks thrown in there, cash. It was just a nightmare. So I spent a couple of months and kind of cleaned that up for them, and that was my first job. And then we left the state for a year. My husband was a pilot, and we went down. He was flying for Air America, and we left the state for a year and then came back in 72. And I came up to visit a friend at the university, and I went down to the Bunnell building. And at that time, they were going through some kind of restructuring, and You can stop me if you need to.
No.
Chuck Belkey was the dean. Chuck was he was the dean of the College of Engineering, and he was the acting dean of our college, with a College of Biology, Wildlife, Fisheries, Agriculture. What else, Dave? I can't remember. Cooperative Extension was in there someplace. All the institutes were in this college. It was just crazy. So I'm sitting there visiting with my friend, and Chuck Belkey comes in, and he says, and he was kind of a gruff old guy, you know, all dressed up in his little shirt with his literally the little pocket protector, and he says, "You want a job?" And I said, "I don't know, you know, I have 2 little kids, and I don't really know how to do anything. I'm an English major. I don't type or do anything, you know." He says, "Come back here tomorrow." So I came back tomorrow. Dave Murray was the department chair of biology at that time. And I don't know if those of you who know Dave, today he looks maybe 45. Then he looked, I mean, he's 75, but then he looked 12. And he had this great big old cigar sitting behind the desk, and I'm like, oh. So Belkey comes in, and he takes me in this back room, and he says, "Okay, here's the job." He says, "I hate biologists." And I hate all those guys with the plaid shirts, and the biology faculty at that time were, of course, you know, they came from the same generation I did, you know, and they'd come up from Berkeley, and, you know, God, Guthrie and McLean, Smith. He was always pretty straight, though. Jerry Schwartz, you know, there were a whole bunch of them. And they were all just a bunch of, you know, 20 to 30-year-old environmentalists, but we didn't have that term then. And and Belkey just couldn't stand to deal with any of them. So my job was to, I mean, he told me, "Your job is to make sure I never have to talk to a biologist." So I did that, and I talked to Dave Murray the other night. He came over to visit me, and he said, "Oh my God, you carried us for 2 years." He said, "None of us could deal with Chuck Belkey." So I mean, and Chuck Belkey was wonderful to me. He was a wonderful guy, but he was a very straight arrow engineer, and his whole faculty were straight arrow engineers with like suits and ties and stuff, you know. So yeah, we were a different breed over in the other building. But then I get into the HR thing, and at that time, you know, HR they had secretary 1, 2, 3, they had accounts tech 1, 2, 3, and you had to take little tests, you know. So you either had to work at typewriter or work an adding machine. Well, I didn't know how to do any of those things. So Chuck Belkey, you know, he screams and yells, and later, many years later, Bonnie Williams told me, she said, "We had to create a job title for you. You were the very first administrative assistant because you couldn't pass the test to do any of these other things."
Well, it wasn't too much longer before you got the august title of Assistant Chancellor of it was pretty newly formed,
Brand new.
community college system. Talk a little bit about that transition there and what those days were like for community colleges and where they were.
Well, that was about 4 or 5 years later, and they had, at the time, there were maybe 3 or 4 community colleges in the state. There was Ketchikan, Bethel, Anchorage, Juneau, and maybe Kenai. I can't quite remember. But they were all really thriving. In fact, Ketchikan is one of the oldest campuses in the state, older than everybody but Fairbanks. And they were thriving. And they were thriving because they didn't have anybody bugging them. Remember, this is like 74, 70. There's no email, there's no faxes, there's no nothing, you know. So they're just out there teaching students and doing what they should do in their communities. It was a beautiful thing, you know. Until we decided in statewide that we could let's see if we can figure out a way to screw this up. So so we decided, not we, it wasn't we then. I was happily up in biology tromping around barefoot in the Bunnell building. They brought in a woman, Elaine Ramos, who's a wonderful woman, a native woman, Tlingit, because some of the board members had decided we really need to have a bigger focus on rural native education. And one of the ways maybe we could do this is to bring these functioning community colleges together, and then there were some programs at UAF that were dealing specifically with some native student issues. Frank Darnell, who I know Ann knows. So let's bring all these programs, the Alaska Native Language Center, which we just started. Let's bring all these programs together and put this person in charge and see if we can really advance rural and native education in the state. So they put in this new vice president. They needed an assistant, somebody who knew what things were doing in the university, and so they hired me. And she and I worked, and she didn't really last very long. I think it was only about 6 months. It was kind of a setup. She wasn't really prepared for it, didn't have the experience, you know, and they kind of chopped her up. It was a sad thing to see. But so then they brought in Pat O'Rourke, who was the chancellor out in Bethel, young kid, just out of New York, but he'd been out there, came through Vista, as everybody in Bethel did, and he brought him in as chancellor. So then Pat and I were working together and put together this community college system, and we worked for a year here in Fairbanks, and then every plane had to fly through Anchorage to get to Fairbanks, so the cost to do anything rural was ridiculous unless you were in Anchorage. So we just picked up and moved down to Anchorage and set up a separate shop down there for the College of Rural Alaska, what was then called Community Colleges, Rural Education and Extension, because the Cooperative Extension Service was also with CRE. And CRE lasted then I was there for 6 years, and Pat left CRE and came up to Fairbanks.
Well, let's talk a little bit about rural campuses. I think some people really think in an age of diminishing financial resources, the university system should contract to big core campuses like Fairbanks, Juneau, Anchorage, and that we should close up these rural campuses. You have a unique perspective on that. What's your thoughts on that when somebody says, you know, we got to slash the budget and here's where we can do it?
Oh yeah, I hear that I've heard that every year I was ever in Juneau. I'm sure John hears it today, you know. What I say to people when they start that is, okay, let's get out the budget. Let's look at it. Okay, here we have Kotzebue. Their total budget is like maybe $500,000. And they serve, you know, several hundred students, and they employ, you know, a dozen people in the community. Is it worth $500,000 and 5 years worth of lawsuits to try to shut down that little campus that provides that kind of service to that community? No, of course not. And it's the same thing in most all of the rural communities. It's just that from a cost standpoint, it's a minimal cost. From a service standpoint, it's enormous benefit to the communities and the students that they serve. We've always tried to make sure that they were restricted. They share services, college to college. Especially here now in Fairbanks, they have formed sort of a rural college consortium here out of UAF with the northern rural campuses. And I think they're functioning better than ever. So no, it's a false argument. And anybody who actually will take the time to sit down and look at it, you know, comes away saying, okay, it's not worth it.
Well, as you started assuming greater leadership positions, I'm wondering, did you have a mentor? Was there a model that you saw of what a successful leader looked like, or how it was best to, you know, kind of look out for your people?
Well, you know, you learn a lot from everybody you work with. I've learned a lot from everybody. So it's hard to pick one person. But I can tell you one person who taught me something later, like when I went back to school at Harvard. There's a professor there whose name was Ronnie Heifetz. So this was in '83 or something. And Ronnie Heifetz it was his first year of teaching at the School of Public Policy. He's a psychiatrist. He's got a PhD in economics, and he's a concert cellist. So he's
Sort of an underachiever.
yeah, kind of an underachiever to begin with. But he had this theory, and there are a lot of theories in management. And I took a class from him, his very first class, as a matter of fact. And I'll make it really quick. But what he taught me, the issue that he taught me that has saved my life, is learning how to separate role from self. And it sounds easy. It's really, really hard. And especially if you're in a job like I was in statewide administration where everybody hates you. They don't know you, but they just hate you because of your title or because of who you work for or, you know, the message you're having to deliver or whatever. So the ability to learn that those people don't know me. They just, they're upset because of the message I'm delivering. Separating that role from self changed my life and made me a really happy person. A person able to be happy in a work environment that is often very tense. And you know, when you go through a lot of different budget reductions and stuff, there's a lot of vitriol that goes on and so on. So that was key to me.
Well, let's segue then into your work representing first the community college system and then the university before the legislature. It sounds like, now we can go back to the other part of that question when I started off. It sounds like you were politically savvy to begin with. So was that useful when you got down to Juneau?
Well, yeah, it's helpful, but I learned on the job, you know, how to be politically savvy. And of course, watching how politics has changed since I started in '76 was the first time I went to Juneau to now is like, you know, it's like a different, or even to when I left, it was like totally different. So when I started going down to Juneau, all 60 legislators, now I don't mean to romanticize this because, you know, there's some exceptions, but basically all 60 legislators believed that they were elected to serve the state of Alaska. And they acted that way. They weren't representing Palmer or North Pole or Fairbanks. I mean, everybody was there to serve Alaska. And so things were easier in that sense. And of course, there wasn't any money. You know, there wasn't a lot of money then. The money came pretty quick, and then that was way more fun.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Way more fun. But it was just a different, like here in Fairbanks, for instance, I can't remember when we stopped doing this, probably about 1980, but they elected their House members here. I think we had 6 seats or something, 4 seats, and it was like, you know, like a whole 15 people would be on the ballot, and the top 4 got to go to Juneau. There was no, you know, Democrat or Republican. I mean, they ran as parties, but just the top 4, whatever they were, whatever mix you got, that's who went down to Juneau. And I loved that because you got these great, you know, these great mixes of people. Mm-hmm. And they were all committed to Fairbanks. And of course, there used to be alliances. You know, there were big alliances, of course, between Fairbanks, rural Alaska, and Juneau against Anchorage. And Anchorage was, at that time, they really didn't have the number of seats. You know, the redistricting hadn't like put them in such a power position, number one. And number two, they were completely inept. So, because the Fairbanks guys had always been really the political leaders of the state, and Southeast, and the Southeast guys, Ketchikan and Sitka, whoa, those guys were, because they had to be, you know, they didn't have much, so they had to be really astute. So the Anchorage guys just seemed kind of bumbling, you know, for many, many years before they finally got it together. Which was, and when they did, of course, then it became, you know, changed the whole nature of, you know, what went on in Juneau. But I forgot your question. Did it help me? I learned on the job. I learned from people there, you know, who would, like Jay Kurtula, who was, you know, he just loved the university, and he believed that the university should be free. So every time we'd have like a little bitty teensy tuition increase or something, he'd go crazy, you know. Like, you know, Jay, come on, we got to do this. But he was just, guys like him were tremendously helpful to sort of carrying the university along and helping out, and helping me personally to learn. And we had, things got kind of wacky at the university there for a little while. We had 5 presidents in a period of 6 years.
You know, it's worth asking you, how many presidents have you worked for?
10.
10.
Yeah, 10. 10. But there were a lot of them there in a quick period of time. And the university had gone through some just horrible times. I ran into one of your regents in the airport the other day, and she said, "Oh, you were here during all the good times." And I'm like, "Oh, you have no idea." The university in the 70s, we went into receivership with the state. So the Department of Administration had to take us over because the vice president for finance was in jail.
That's a little awkward.
And things were a mess. I mean, they were horrible.
Well, and things also tanked in the late 80s, too, when
well, then we
oil
had,
prices did.
Yeah, budget cuts and so on and so on. But, you know, in Juneau, if they didn't like the president, and believe me, during this period of time, they didn't like a lot of our presidents, then, you know, they'd come to me and say, "You got to keep him out of town. We don't want to see him. We don't want him here. He can't come." And if we happened to have a board president, you know, or something that they didn't like, it was like, they don't get to come to town either. You know? So that became awkward.
So those early years shielding biologists actually proved fruitful for...
Exactly. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there are certain recurring issues that come up. We've talked about rural campuses being one of them. But another one that's not sexy, that no one, but has been a thorn in the side of not a few presidents and chancellors, is deferred maintenance and keeping the things running and the power plants going and whatnot. How, as a person who represents the university's interests, do you make them care, or do you sort of get them to the point where they're accepting of it?
You know, that's a tough one. I grappled with that. I have some ideas about how that can happen. But many of you were here back at a time when the campus was really in bad shape, and Chancellor Wadlow really made it a priority, and so really lobbied hard for this deferred maintenance, and she got it. But in the process of getting it, the enrollment went like this, because the students and their parents were like, "Jesus, we don't want to go to school there. The place is falling apart." You know, so it's what I think ultimately has to happen. You need to talk to some legislators about this, but it's a problem. It's a problem every state. People love, it's fun to build things. It's really not fun to take care of them. And of course, you're on the oldest campus in the system, so the huge proportion of the deferred maintenance is here, where in any given year you may not have the political juice. It's necessary to pay for deferred maintenance when the Anchorage campus wants to build like a new gym or something, and it's way more fun than this, patching roofs and stuff. So ultimately, I think what has to happen is sort of a system similar to what some other states have put in, where you have a deferred maintenance program that goes in and begins to be funded as soon as the building is set to be built. And you begin putting money into the maintenance fund so that it's moving along with that appropriation. The state can keep the money and earn interest on it and so on. But there's a state maintenance fund. I think they do that with some of the state facilities now. I'm not sure. But we talked about it a lot just before I left, trying to get a system like that. And it would take, an initial infusion of some cash. But I think really ultimately that's the only way to do it, because your oldest campuses are the ones that are going to always in this state have have the least political clout because you have a brand new campus in Anchorage. Everything's new.
And
you know?
shiny.
And shiny, yeah. They don't have maintenance problems yet. You know? So it's a problem we didn't adequately foresee at the time when we were building new buildings. But even by the time we did in the 90s, it was like nobody was interested in talking about it. It's so unsexy.
Well, we're going to move on to other topics here shortly, but I do want to ask you, given your years working with lawmakers, what do you think? I mean, it seems like they don't own up to sort of like the responsibility to support the public institution, you know, that has their name associated with it. How do you do that? How do you convince them that there's a real value to higher education and you should take pride in and help realize that?
Yeah, that's a tough one. You know, Alaska's faced, there's a couple of issues, I think, that are different here than they are in other states. In other states, the majority of the legislature would be graduates of their state-funded universities. That's not the case in the state of Alaska. It'd be nice, and we'd like to aim for that because it makes a difference. If you have legislators who are graduates of our institutions, they have a different sense of commitment. But the majority of our legislators either didn't ever go to college or they didn't go to college here. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that this is a very expensive system. There's just no way to get around it. The University of Alaska costs a lot of money. And when they go to their meetings with other legislators from other states, and they have a national organization which does a lot of research and provide research to their legislators about costs per student, cost per credit hour, cost per, you know. We're at the top, you know, we're an expensive operation. And so unless you have legislators who are committed to the state of Alaska as a whole and committed to being able to provide education in place to students in Bethel and Fairbanks and Ketchikan, then they're going to get moved off over to this, it's too expensive, make everybody come to Anchorage because we can offer more cost-effective education in Anchorage than we can in any other place in the state. So then you have to argue backwards from there. And they're kind of willing, I think Fairbanks is well enough established that, you know, we don't ever really have anybody trying to shut down Fairbanks, I don't think. It's pretty well established. But, you know, the rest of the system, I mean, it's something that we dealt with at the system level, at the campus level. I'm sure Johnson's dealing with the same thing. The costs are, because of the way we're organized, are very expensive. And so any major restructuring look at the university that we did up to the one you're currently looking at now, really the only way to reduce the cost is to reduce the administration. Because that's what drives up the cost. When you have three major student admissions offices for the number of students that would be the normal number of students at one normal-sized state university, it's going to cost you a lot more money. So, you know, but trying to conceive of a state now where you just had to go back, where we went backwards to a single university, that's probably unrealistic and not really worth the effort to do it. If I could wave a magic wand, that's what I would tell you would be the best thing you could do. Single university system, go back to the provosts at Anchorage, at Fairbanks, and, you know, consolidate all those administrations. Now with the kind of technology we have, it would be simple to do, you know. But I don't think politically that's going to be able to happen. But I think you're going to have, that's really the only place I see that you can make the kind of major reduction. I mean, you can cut out, you know, the music program at this campus or the journalism program at this campus, but, you know, those are small potatoes.
in this age of Game of Thrones, we have Shakespeare's King John down the hill here at this moment. I want to ask you, you occupied the top post for a couple of months in there, and any chance of a coup d'etat, you would have been the only woman. And in fact, in this whole series, you're the only woman who is a major...
Well, I'm glad you noticed that.
Yeah, thank you. And during the walk down memory lane on Mondays, Professor and Dean Ann Shingwin was the only woman represented in that group. And so it seems like women's issues is still with us. Would you agree?
Did you, by the way, ask that same question or point out that same thing to Hamilton and the chancellors and the other men that you've been interviewing?
Let me get back to you on that one. Well, now you were responsible for starting UAF's Women's Center. What was you've talked a little bit about it, but what did you see that you recognized this would be an important addition to the campus? It's a setup.
What did I see?
Yeah.
Well, no women in administrative positions. Well, there were two. There was Bryna Kessel, and there was Benita Neeland. Other than that, in the academic administrative end, in the faculty, very few women. Even in the liberal bastion of biology, most all of the women were part-time faculty. Carol Feist, and over in arts and sciences, Anne, she was off course. She hired nothing but women. But in the sciences, we were still a little weak. And it's interesting. I just want to do just a quick sidelight. When I went to retire, a woman came to my retirement party and she said, "Oh, you're such an inspiration. You went from being an administrative assistant to being the vice president." That's what I want to do. And I didn't say anything to her, but I thought to myself, the world has changed so much that the unlikely, that is so unlikely anymore. Because in 1970, I can tell you, every secretary 123 and accountant 123 had at least a master's degree, and many of them PhDs. There was no EEOC or you hire the least qualified or the minimally qualified. You hired the deans and directors. They had their pick of women, and these women were highly educated, and women were running this university at that next tier down. And so it really wasn't until later on that the women began to, move into being able to be hired as faculty positions. But it was tough in those days. So when I came back up to Fairbanks, and Chancellor O'Rourke was up here, and he asked me to come up here, I said, I was still at the community college system down in Anchorage, and I said, one thing I'd really like to do is I'd like to start a women's center there. And he said, okay, I'll let you do that. So when I got up here, I don't know, I think it was 6 months or something, but we started that, and the first thing I did was hire Patty Kostelik to actually run it. And we dealt with all issues. We weren't as focused on issues for employment issues. It was really more on student issues and really trying to talk to these young women, which was stunning at the time to me, that there were so many young women. Well, I don't know why it was stunning, because they didn't see themselves being able to move into these positions because there weren't women in these positions. And so we were really kind of battling that, trying to encourage these young women that you really have an opportunity to move up and move in. And so that we spent a lot of time in the first couple of years on that, a lot of time on sexual assault and awareness. It was just as bad then as it apparently still is.
Sexual assault and domestic violence.
Still,
yeah.
I can't even believe it's still an issue on campuses. But anyhow, it was a great experience, and from the Women's Center flourished, and from there then academic women moved on with the Women's Studies program, which really emerged from the Women's Center. And
Well, it extended beyond the academy, for example, the Alaska Women's Commission,
Women's
and,
Commission,
and
yeah.
talk about the formation of that you were instrumental in.
Yeah, the Women's Commission, there were so many systemic changes that needed to be made to help move women along, both in employment, as well as changing public policy and so on. So the Women's Commission was formed, and it was a what I call a quiet commission. They were, the women who started the Women's Commission we were really focused on policy issues. Don't you think, Karen? I mean, there wasn't a lot of screaming and yelling. It was just, we were kind of nose to the grindstone. Let's see what statutory changes we can make. How can we move the state forward? And Alaska has, frankly, been ahead of many, many states in terms of women's issues in the state. I think we were the first state, maybe the second, to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. Unfortunately, when it came back around again, we were the first to say, we take our vote back. But early on, so the Women's Commission was a great experience, and it was right for its time.
Well, given that background, several issues dominate, social issues dominate campus life. We've had the abuses of Title IX, those violations. We've had an attempt to allow guns on campus.
Yeah.
And we also have a perennial issue about whether undergraduates alcohol should be on campus. So all of these kind of underscore the question about how much freedom, how much sort of control administrators should exert in student life. Do you have any insights on that?
Mm-mm.
Nope. Moving on then.
Those are big issues.
Yeah.
Big issues for the chancellors. Those student issues they're tough.
Yeah,
They're tough. I have a lot of insight on the gun issue, but
well,
the legislature, you guys didn't pass that, right, last time? Guns are still not allowed on campus? Sort of. Okay, good.
yeah. Well, I want to say that you've been awarded several distinctions, and again, in this context of this, the Girl Scouts recognition of a Woman of Excellence, the Edith R. Bullock Award for Excellence. This must give you a great deal of satisfaction. I'd like you to kind of reflect a little bit about the future of education. It seems as if, and this is just my impression, the academy that once was intended to form well-rounded citizens now is increasingly being sort of asked to become a corporate model in delivering a product called education and getting them into the workforces as quickly as possible. Now, that's just my impression. You have a much more intimate knowledge of that. What's your sense about where the academy is going and what?
Wow.
That's another big question.
Well, you're a good liberal arts major, as I am, so you see the world, in a little different lens. I spent a lot of time through the community college experience setting up the colleges, and then on the Alaska Workforce Investment Board, and working with vocational education in the state. And I think there's really a strong need for two paths. Okay. There's a really strong need and a need for a great deal more coordination with the high schools for students who really are interested in vocational careers, who can move quickly from high school into vocational tracks. Now, the vocational tracks anymore are often 4-year degrees. They're no longer, even the Ford motor program that we had, this premier program at UAA, was a 2-year program where you'd work 6 months, go back to the Ford company. It's a baccalaureate program now, and they're considering making it a master's program because it's so complicated, these cars. And the students need to be able to read, they need to understand, they need to do computer stuff. And so there's not a lot, to say vocational education doesn't mean, just a carpenter. And even carpenters now, if you're going to, the unions require so much more from high school students that when I left, we were having to do training programs at our community college to get students into the union apprenticeship programs. They're coming out of high school so unprepared. So anyhow, there's a need for 2 tracks as far as I'm concerned. But at the university, I wanted this for my children, and I didn't really feel that they had that here at UAF. And I'm not sure I had it either, but I think it's a worthy goal. I think that there does need to be a true academy in the sense that, and I always wanted to see Fairbanks really as sort of the campus that saw itself as a more selective enrollment campus where students came here. They all had to live on campus. It was going to be, at least there's going to be a cohort of students that we're going to move through together and have a really broad-based curriculum. I think there's still a need for that. I know that there were a lot of people who used to see Juneau as that campus. That was what they thought the niche was for Juneau, to become that little small liberal arts campus. But it just didn't work out down there, and there's really not a need for it there. So I don't know, I kind of got sidetracked there, but I think that there does need to be, I think the quality of education is getting much more specialized, so that to get a baccalaureate degree now, I think, I don't know, what is it in biology? Can you get a biology baccalaureate degree in 4 years anymore? Okay, I think it's 5 years to get an engineering baccalaureate degree. Yeah. And when I left, the engineering degree had something like 8 credits of electives available to students. Other than that, and it was very rigidly programmed. That's not right. So students are coming out, and employers complain about this too to the university. The students don't know how to think. They may know the issues, but they don't know. They don't know how to read well. They don't know how to write well. Most of us, just looking at how old all of you are, when we went to school, we had to take a lot of English and writing classes. Now at Fairbanks, you can check this out and see if this is still true, but you could get a baccalaureate degree outside of some of the English degrees. You can get a baccalaureate degree and never have to read a book outside of your major. No book required in the English classes. That's ridiculous, you know. So yeah, I think there are a lot of changes that need to be made to produce a more well-rounded citizens and more well-rounded workers. You know, in my career, I basically made a decision early on that I only hired English majors. Because if you can read, and if you read a lot, you can think. That's been my experience. And my experience, in no offense to my scientific friends, but I just think that we're not requiring enough in terms of the creative liberal arts of our students to move out into the world and become good citizens. I mean, I don't want to correlate it with recent elections or anything, but nobody with a good liberal arts background voted for that guy.
Well, good way to put it. Yeah. So usually on these events, I open it up and I expect your scientific friends to come right up with questions here. But, and what I think I'll do is I can generally hear people. So if you ask the question, I'll repeat it so it's documented on the video and also people who haven't heard. But does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask Wendy? Boy, you must move. Dave, so does the cell phone help, that technology help women in the marketplace and education?
Well, I think I think the art of communicating is in trouble right now. And just based on my own grandchildren, you know, the concept when we require them to sit down at the table and talk during dinner, and then when they're done they have to actually sit there and talk. Well, everybody finishes and communicate with each other. They think that's really weird. You know, it's very difficult for them, boys and girls, because the idea of communicating and articulating an idea and listening to somebody else's idea and talking back and forth is, it's an art that we used to require students to take. Oral communication was a baccalaureate requirement. Is it still?
Yes.
Okay, good. But it's really not being encouraged a lot. In talking with my brothers and sisters who are teachers in the schools, and Patty's sister, who's a teacher too with those middle school monsters, they're communicating with each other on their phones. They're not talking. I mean, it's hard to talk, you know. We used to come home from school and get on the phone immediately with our friends that we just saw 4 minutes ago, you know, and talk. They don't talk anymore. They communicate, you know. So anyhow, I think it's something to be concerned about, you know, that just the art of communication, and you can hear it on these crazy TV programs, you know, where people are trying to talk and carry on a discussion on, can't even watch it anymore. I mean, they don't know how to talk back and forth.
So tweets aren't persuasive rhetoric, in other words.
No.
It seems to me one of the most transformative changes over the course that you've been with the university is that, what was it, 1989, when we went from the University of Alaska to 3 universities of Alaska.
Yeah.
And there must have been other models out there. I know it was a crisis, I know it was a political move, but how considered was that? What other models were debated? For example, a state university could have been created, a community college statewide system could have been created.
Yeah,
at
that
same moment.
was my plan.
Yeah, and we would have had a different course.
Yeah.
So for people who
Well-
didn't hear that question, when the university kind of broke into these 3 main campuses, were there other models available?
I'd say, Brian, that the most transformative change for the university was really in, would have been 75, 74, 75. And that's when we went from the University of Alaska, and then we had provosts in Anchorage and Fairbanks. Howard Cutler was the provost here. And then we spent a year being sort of the University of Alaska dash Fairbanks, or maybe it was a comma, I can't remember, and the University of Alaska dash Anchorage. And we still had Anchorage Community College, which was bigger than Fairbanks at the time, it was huge. And the Anchorage was just a 2-year upper division school. We had an opportunity at that time to do it right, but the money was, there was enough money, and there was some political. John Lindauer came in as chancellor down at UAA, and he had this grand plan to turn it into another university down there, and the community got behind it, and we allowed that to happen. And when that happened, then it totally changed the nature of what this system was going to be. So moving forward, then we allowed Juneau to happen, which was a completely ridiculous decision also. Again, we had this vibrant community college in Juneau, one of the best community colleges in the state. And so, we weren't happy with that. We had to add, another layer on top of it to make it into a tiny little university that can never really get enough students to justify its existence. But so then during the restructuring, here we're faced with a it was like 22% cut. It's huge. And the options, again, real options for cutting money at a university a distributed university like this are going to be on the administrative side. You can cut programs, but it takes a while to save the money, and there's usually not a lot of money to be saved. You know, it's certainly not quickly. You can kind of save it over time if you decide you're not going to offer any journalism at this campus. It's all going to be in Anchorage. You know, you can maybe save money, you know, 4 or 5 years from now. There are legal ramifications for students. You have to continue the students in the program, so you have to dribble it out over time, and you know, it becomes complicated. So that's what we were looking at, was what are our options? The option you named was, you know, going back to a single university and then a single community college system was not a viable option at that point. That was in 84, 85. By then, the Anchorage campus was solidly entrenched in Anchorage, and the Board of Regents actually discussed it out loud at a meeting in, I think we were in Kodiak. And it somehow got out to the press, and they did 3 editorials in a week saying, you know, no way. So that got, I mean, we had all the data. We'd done a lot of work in the background, you know, to show you could save enormous amounts of money administratively. But politically, couldn't do it. The decision was made, couldn't do it. And the community colleges, it's an interesting question. You know, I'd have to talk to some of the people, but the interesting issue is that, and right now the northern community colleges are attached to Fairbanks, and they're pretty happy. They're operating, I think, pretty effectively, and they're pretty happy. Southeast, Ketchikan and Sitka, they're attached to Juneau, and they're fine. They're very self-sustaining. They're old, well-established community colleges. They're just fine. They don't need anybody doing anything with them, really. The South Central community colleges are unhappy being attached to UAA, but UAA doesn't pay much attention to them, so they don't care. But the reality is that Kotzebue, well, let's take Chukchi, Bethel. Well, you can take any of the northern communities. Bethel has more in common with Sitka Community College than they have with UAF. The community colleges, they serve the same kind of students, they have the same issues, the same problems. There's a great benefit that can come. And whenever we'd put together a statewide meeting of the community college people, it was alive and vibrant and exciting. You know, they have so much in common. And with the technology, there's so much sharing that can be done that I'm not sure that there's any money that can be saved, but I think you might better serve the state of Alaska with a more consolidated kind of approach at some point in the future. But, you know, like I say, I'm a little bit out of it now, so, well, shit, I'm a lot out of it in terms of what's going on at the campuses. But I know that the northern campuses, which are primarily Native-driven community campuses, they're pretty happy right now at UAF. They feel like they're getting, you know, they're getting the kind of support that they need. At least that's my understanding. So they might be reluctant to give that up.
I think we have time for one more. Michelle, did you want to ask a question?
Well, Wendy, for those that don't know me, my name is Michelle Rizek, and I work at the statewide system. And President Johnson wanted to be here today, but he couldn't be here. And so, on behalf of President Johnson, in recognition of your 40 years of exemplary service and leadership to the University of Alaska, its students, faculty, staff, and alumni, I am here to present you the Vice President Emerita Award. Long overdue.
Do you want to go up and present it?
Why, thank you, Mr. Rizek. Does that mean I can get like a parking pass or something?
You may have to check that at the...
Much good in Chelan, however.
Well, there's a reception over in the Akasofu building following this evening's presentation, and I'm sure you'll get some more pointed questions there.
Is
So-
Akasofu still working? And yeah,
Yeah.
Yes.
great.
So on behalf of Summer Sessions, thank you for attending this evening.
Thank you all very much.